everybody. I'm here with Lacey Rhea, and she is the Associate Director of Academic Finance and Administration at Duke in the Department of Medicine Division of Cardiology.
That's right, yeah.
And I'm going to just start by saying the reason why I invited Lacey here was because I saw her do a presentation with Cayuse on benchmarking, and I just loved her approach to everything. But we're having this conversation on the heels of the IDC announcement that just went out, and so we were talking about how it feels a little silly talking about how we need more people when we're talking about the destruction of our entire industry. So the actual question I would actually have then, I'm going to still ask some of the similar questions, but when we originally talk about how many people you need to be a research administrator, you had a really interesting metric by which you were determining why you need so many people, right? Why do we need so many people to do this? And a lot of it comes from the nature of the work that we do, the amount of regulations that are applied, the things that we have to do. So I feel like this is actually kind of a worthy conversation to still have, because even if you cut IDC rates, that doesn't change the amount of regulations that we need to follow. Like, imagine this. Imagine IDC rates are cut across the board exactly as they say they're going to be for 15%, right? How many amendments is that now need to be issued from every organization to every organization, right? Like, we just broke every sponsored contracting office in the country. So I'm curious to know, let's put this aside just for the moment, the IDC thing, and let's just talk a little bit about sort of what is the workload of an RA, and in your experience, how have we been approaching it almost maybe incorrectly?
Sure. I mean, you're right. So that's one of the underlying problems, is that every single change that gets made in research has a corresponding administrative impact. And that's where we come in. And so we're fundamentally underestimating how many people we need to do the work. That's my hypothesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this comes from, as you mentioned, just a lack of understanding of the type of work that we do. It's very cognitive based. It's not easily measured in a transactional way. We can't count the number of thoughts, right, and measure that. And so it because it's difficult to quantify, it kind of just doesn't get quantified, the work that we do.
Yeah.
And I think that we have just a false premise from which we're starting when we're calculating the number of FTE that we need to do the work. We're starting with numbers that aren't reflective of how a human being moves through their day even. So I mentioned in that Cayuse presentation and all subsequent presentations the number 2,080 hours. So that comes from 40 hours a week times 52 weeks, 2,080 hours. We're starting from a false premise just right there, because nobody is giving 40 hours a week every single week. That doesn't even account for paid holidays. Never mind time you take off, sick time, required meetings, required trainings, the time it takes to go from one meeting to another. I mean, it's just that's like at 100% capacity 100% of the time, and that's just not possible as a human being. So we have to get a more reflective number from which to start, and doing that requires a really close look at how we're spending our day as people. And this is true of every industry, not just research. Every industry has these real life things that happen throughout the week that we can't capture as transactional load, contributions to transactional productivity. So I may have gotten a little off.
Yeah, no, it really does, because one of the things that I think about is that so let's say, for example, you're talking about so we have 80 hours if you assume that we worked the full 100% of the time, never going to the bathroom, never getting up, never, just no meetings ever. I am literally using that time to transactionally deal with grant submissions and grant awards or whatever, right? But if you think about it, the reality of our jobs now is that that would be in a perfect world where all grants are all moving smoothly and like there's no backlog to deal with, there's no cleanup to deal with, there's no any of that. Now, if you pull in, I'm going to use post-award as an example. So let's say in the post-award space, you're doing some cleanup because there are these grants that haven't been looked at in a while because the portfolio has been vacant, right? So now the person who comes in has to deal with all these new things that are coming in while also cleaning up the stuff from the back. And the cleaning up the stuff from the back end is not just doing reconciliations and cost transfers and figuring out what's compliant. There's a lot of time that's spent sort of sitting while you're doing the dishes thinking about, like, how do I navigate this particular problem because I have to be able to be compliant with my solution. We have to make sure that we're being good fiduciary stewards. We also have to make sure that we're following all policies. And we also want to make sure that we're maximizing the amount of money that both the organization and the investigator are getting. So there's all these things that we're trying to figure out how to navigate. And sometimes it's complicated. And so that in and of itself is time that is spent on the job, quote unquote, but like not, it's not tangible to that transaction. So like doing that labor cost transfer may only take me 25 minutes once I've figured out the solution. Oh my God, it's so easy, but it took me like 3 days of my lifetime of expertise to figure out what that solution is.
Well, that's, I think one of the, when I say we have a fundamental misunderstanding of what it takes to do our job, that is one of the things I'm talking about. On its surface, a cost transfer is simple, right? You know, there's a guide for it. You do this, then this, and this systematically in this, in our, whatever our system is. There's a guide for it. It's easy. There's steps you take.
Yeah.
The problem is all of the, you know, sort of forensic accounting that goes along with that cost transfer. It's the, I don't run into many problems, especially in the post-award arena, which is really, I think, where all of the meat is, all of the risk, all of the fraud, right?
Yeah.
And I don't run into many problems on that arena that are cut and dry. I mean, there are things, I had one very recently that was what amounted to like a $22,000 error. And the number of layers that I had to peel back to even figure out where it went wrong, how it happened, and then, okay, how do we undo it? And the number of offices that it was going to take to unravel. I mean, we're talking about a cumulative set of days worth of work to correct what essentially was one error, literally one click error that happened. And even being able to identify that problem, that came on the back of years and years and years of experience that I have in that arena. Experience that I have outside research administration that allowed me to recognize, oh, this, when this happened, this over here happened, which led to this. That doesn't come free. That came from years of my experience, which has a cost associated with it. And then it takes a lot of people to undo. And so we can't simply say, oh, this unit did 500 cost transfers. Those take 20 minutes each. Yep. That means we need this many people to do all the cost transfers. It's not that simple. It's way more complicated than that. And never mind the fact that a cost transfer in and of itself is a waste of time, right? It's lost time. We're redoing.
Oh my God. It's like, there has got to be a better way of doing this. And so, you know, sorry, go ahead.
Just, it doesn't even count as productive time because we're literally undoing something that was done wrong and then redoing it correctly, which is a net zero, or really a net negative on what we're really contributing to the sort of the end game goal of compliance or whatever.
Yeah. And I think so, you know, if you think about it, like, and this is sort of actually a conversation that came up today, is that like, over the years have noticed, and we all have noticed, that the amount of administrative regulations that have now, you know, that are, and not, some of them make sense, some of them are for protection, some of them are what the fuck, right? And like, and so I feel like going back to this IDC thing is that I think there is a lot of bloat in general, right? There's a lot of stuff that we're spending time on, but I feel like the intention behind this is to look, we're going to save all this money for the federal government. The end result, aside from the chaos, is going to be then that for everything, it's now harder. It's more work, more that cost goes somewhere. Somebody
Right.
has to like cover that, and it's probably going to be the states, or organizations will just sort of collapse under it. And so I think the question that I would have is that, give me one second. I actually had I had the question written down here. Is when you think about, because you are in the finance space right now, regardless of how this all turns out, it's evident that that the salvo has been made, shall we say. So like we're all moving in that direction. We know that we're moving in some direction. Whatever direction it is, we're moving in some direction. It's not the same as the direction it's been in the past. And even the announcement they already made was talking about moving forward for many organizations, not moving backwards. So now, in light of what you just said, do we not need even more
Yes.
people than we needed before? Because you need to clean up,
Yes.
like you want to capture as much of that as you can, because that's at full IDC.
Yeah, I mean, so this is actually another one of my sort of soapbox things, is that this idea that process improvement, or creating SOPs, or having things that are designed to create efficiencies, that actually is a way to cut costs in the long term, yes. But in the short term, to actually effectively implement process improvement goals, you have to have people who are actually dedicated to only that. A problem that I see over and over again is that a problem that I see over and over is that we say, okay, we can't hire more people. We're gonna instead make our processes more efficient, and then
I've definitely seen that in organizations.
You task the people who are already overloaded with the very arduous task of identifying process efficiencies, writing new processes, and then training people on those. You need more people to do that, not less. And so this creates this cycle where we make a change, we don't adequately resource that change, and then the problem just gets kicked down the road or becomes something different. And so this right here is, the IDC thing. Let's get real. We're not cutting costs with this. We are cutting funding. The costs are not changing. If we want to actually have a net positive impact on administrative bloat, we actually have to invest more dollars and resources into identifying where the bloat is and then figuring out how to streamline it. And so it's a short-term increase in our investment for a long-term cost savings. And this is true anywhere in business. You have to invest in something in order to see payoff down the road.
And I think that's a really important point, is that like, a lot of the solutions are not people related. It's all the solutions are always technology. It's a new software. It's a new system. It's a new process. It's always something, but it's never more people. And this is a chronic issue across the country. And I think what's interesting is that like, and not interesting in a good way, like interesting in a, wow, this is pretty scary kind of way, is that, we're talking about this. I mean, it's really funny. We're talking about this as like this abstract, research conversation. But the truth is that if you take that, and being in the Department of Cardiology, like this is actually where a lot of people, every person knows someone who's dealt with something heart related, right? And the infrastructure of these organizations that creates the environment where the research can be conducted, and then you figure out how to do better pacemakers or keep people alive or do these fabulous open heart surgeries that you do, that you don't have to cut people open anymore, right? All of those things come from the infrastructure that is being supported by the indirect cost rates and by the people who are supporting the research. Like all of these things are sort of interconnected. And so I'm curious to know, in the context of both the human resources aspect that we're just talking about, and then in the context of how this is going to, like, how do you feel like this will trickle down to impact, like, Susie Smith, who's living in a town in Iowa, who I happen to have, her name is not Susie Smith, but I do have a friend in Iowa who they can't get the health care that they need for their child there. And so they actually have to travel to Chicago to be able to see a specialist at one of the academic university medical centers that would suffer under this. So I'm curious to know, like, how are you seeing that impact? What do you feel about that impact globally on a human scale?
Well, I mean, when Susie travels from wherever to the academic center, there's a lot of administrative work that goes into that, reimbursing that person, consenting that person. All of these things have administrative costs. And so when we cut our funding for administrative infrastructure, which is what this essentially is, we're reducing our ability to do those tasks. And so that's a direct impact to those people, right? If we don't have the people to, make the sandwiches, we don't sell sandwiches. It's that simple.
Right. It's actually a really interesting point, because it occurred to me as you were saying that, right? Because my sister and I were talking today about, when you see a graph that says, look at how much regulations have gone up. And Syra, she came in and she said, well, a lot of these are to protect human beings who are being, and so, like, when you think about it, if you're cutting the administrative costs, then you're also cutting the people who, like you said, consent, the people who do the IRB, who make sure that it is safe. And what's interesting is that, like, because of the fact that, like, the way in which, like, a lot of people would assume that those are direct costs. They would assume that, like, oh, if there's someone being consented at this place, they're being paid by the grant. Really, it's the hospital that's paying them, or, like, there's there's sometimes where grants are paying for them too, but there are a lot of times grants don't give you that much money. Like,
right.
A lot of times they don't give you enough money to cover the expenses of what it is that you're trying to do. And so you're offsetting it with operational funds, you're offsetting it with discretionary funds, and so, like, though it seems like a lot of money to, in both cases, one, there's the indirect cost, but then there is it seems like a lot of money to invest in the people. In the long run, you're actually paying the price of the price is actually incalculable, because it's going across, like, so many different areas that we just looked at.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a single research admin who would disagree that we need to refine processes, that we need to reduce administrative bloat, that there's waste. That is, like, absolutely. I also think that most research administrators would agree that there are administrative things that we go through that seem pointless, that are just busy work, that sort of thing. But that in and of itself isn't going to be solved by taking the money away. And we have to be willing to look at these things and have people who are dedicated to looking at these things. And we have to have a seat at the table. So this is another thing that I come to all the time. The people on the ground doing the work are the people who can tell you where the inefficiencies are. But these people are rarely called on to actually come sit in a room with the decision makers. You'll create committees and you'll call people from the department, 2 people to come and sit in and beta test a system, or it's not that we're never included, but the fact that these big decision making groups often don't have career research administrators as a part of it, I think is a big misstep at the institutions that I'm familiar with. And when I say career research administrators, I mean people who have been doing this work in research administration, not finance, not upper administration, have actually managed grants, have actually done transactional work, and maybe now are higher level, but who actually understand the work that we do and what goes into every small transaction that we make. We know where the bloat is.
I know, and we all agree. I think that's what's really interesting, is that everybody agrees with the problem.
Sure.
Like, we all agree that the problem is bloat, the problem is some of the busy work, and also, the solution may not be a sledgehammer to, like, everything. And, again, you never know how these things are going to turn out, but I think ultimately, like, it will force us to figure out ways of dealing with this, there's some more to come. So, as we sort of start to reach the tail end of this conversation, I wanted to ask you, because one of the things that I wanted to ask that I have actually here for every research administrator is that one of the challenges that we have is telling people what we do. Okay, so like I actually want to get a bunch of recordings of people talking about what we do. So I have two questions for you. So the first question is, what is research administration? What do you do?
So the way I always explain it to my friends and family is I keep it very simple. As a departmental research administrator, I assist faculty with applying for proposals. So when they want to put a proposal in for sponsored funding, I help them organize their proposal. I help make sure that their budget is in line with what the sponsor is requesting the budget be prepared as. I organize all of the documents for them, and then I help them submit. And then if and when that award comes in as an actual award, I am there to help guide the faculty member through all of the terms and conditions, making sure that we don't break any rules, that we spend the money the way that we're supposed to, and that we don't overspend or underspend the dollars, and then all the way through to closeout. And so that's like departmental research administration at its most fundamental, which we've talked about as such an underselling of what actually goes into that. But that's basically how I explain it to people who have never really interacted with my profession.
And what do you love about it?
I think the challenge of, well, ironically, the very thing that I'm sort of fighting against, which is I really love uncovering problems. So sort of the investigative nature of it, of looking at what other people just see as numbers and actually being able to drill down and investigate what went wrong, how did this thing happen that shouldn't have happened. And then for me, it's really, root cause analysis. What is the root cause analysis of this? Why did these errors happen? Which, in my experience, it always comes back to a lack of adequate staffing or a lack of training of those staff. So
absolutely.
I like figuring that piece out.
I love that. That's Cyrus' favorite too, by the way. Cyrus' favorite is the forensic accounting problem. Like, I think, and I just was talking to somebody today, Jess Thompson, and she loves the teaching and the training part. Sure. And I think that's one of the things that I think I love about this job is that there's so many different, it's like we talk, and this is why you're talking about like how you describe it to people, but you're like, it really doesn't cover everything. It's like the job is so broad and has so many different areas that you can be enthusiastic about. One of my friends hates research administration. She doesn't like being a research administrator. She never liked it. But she loved the compliance aspect of it. She loved it. Like she was upset, and I hated I'm like, I'll do it's like, ugh. She's now the director of compliance at Harvard because she fucking loved it so much. She went off and she's like, this is going to, so you can start in research administration and find something else that you love. And that's what I think is so great about it is that it has its fingers in so many different spaces, right? Yes. That you have the ability to impact change in a lot of spaces. Lacey, thank you so much for being here with me today. Is there anything that you wanted to share? And wait, no, you know what? Let's these are my first few that I'm doing, so I'm still waiting. Lacey, thank you for joining us today. If anybody wants to actually reach out to you and talk to you more about your ideas about benchmarking, problem solving, where can they find you?
So I am on LinkedIn, and that's one of the easiest ways probably to find me.
I can also put it in the show notes for this.
I have an email address that I use specifically for all of this hubba hubba. And it's
fabulous. We will connect people with you. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with us.